time. First we have Cristina Hickman, who's going to talk to us about efficiencies in the IVF lab.
Okay, so thank you very much to the committee for choosing this abstract. It's quite an interesting one. It's on lean management in the IVF clinic, using technology to eliminate wasted time in the IVF lab processes whilst maximizing the value to the patients. These are my conflicts of interest. In the interest of time, there's a few. The one that really matters for today is the fact that I am the Chief Clinical Officer for fertility. So embryologists in America and the UK it's been documented both by the SRM and ARCs that they experience high levels of stress, high levels of burnout, and significant levels of stress-induced mental health. These are completely off the charts compared to other professions. And these are thought to be caused mainly by a global shortage of embryologists compared to fertility treatment demand. What this means on a day-to-day practice, and I can see many embryologists in the room, so you all know what this means day to day, is long hours, led from shortage of staffs, lack of breaks. It's not unusual to go full day without being able to go to the toilet, and a lot of this could be solved if we just looked at our bureaucratic processes. So the concept of lean management is something that I didn't learn through my ACE certificate and through my training. It's something that I learned outside fertility, but I think it applies a lot to every fertility clinic. It should be run alongside your quality management system. It's an approach to managing an organization that focuses on the people rather than the processes. And the idea is that you look at each step of everything that you do and you identify, does this add value to the patient? And if the answer is no, you shouldn't be doing it. You're wasting your time. So what this lean management means is looking at ways to eliminate waste and looking at ways to maximize the value to your patients. So the objective of this study was to assess the amount of time that embryologists spend during an average IVF cycle and explore how technology can be used to make the processes leaner and whilst at the same time improving standards of care. This is not a talk about making things cheap and cheerful. This is a talk about taking the best of both worlds. So the methodology was fairly simple. We interviewed 6 lab directors. 3 of them were from Europe. I'm not going to get into the whole Brexit. This is geography Europe. And 3 of them were from North America, okay, from USA. 1 Spanish and 2 British. And the question was very simple. We asked them to look at the processes of how they conduct their current treatment with their patients, each step of the process, and what it looks like before and after Chloe. Now, for those of you who don't know Chloe is a support system. It's here to support the embryologist using AI. And it's more than just a score. It's not just about telling you which embryo to transfer first, second, or third. It actually goes beyond that. It will automatically assess how many PNs the embryo has. Did the oocyte degenerate after ICSI or not? How many cells did it have at various days of development? It will tell you what is the quality of that blastocyst. And all of this can be automatically filled into your EMR so that your role is no longer about typing. Your role is about verifying, making you more efficient. In addition to the direct integration to the EMR, there's also the possibility of having live and continuous KPIs. So rather than waiting for your next KPI meeting to know what your degeneration rates were for a particular month, you can now get them live because the system is doing the assessment completely and accurately and timely manner. You're also able to work remotely. So because the system is in the cloud, there's a security system that you're able to connect to anything that has a screen. You have to log in, you have your passwords, there's a whole thing that ensures that you are you. But once you're through, you're able to make the identification of help support your team members. So I have heard from several of you who are using Chloe at the moment, where you're here right now and you've been supporting your teams, which are all the way on the other side of the channel, to help them determine which embryo to transfer first, or what should they do with a particular embryo. Should we discard it, should we freeze it or not? And this ability to have this remote access brings additional efficiencies. Lastly, it's the ability of, at a touch of a button, to be able to send this into a summarized report that you quickly check through, all self-populated by the AI, and then it goes straight to the patient once you have verified it. So you don't have to go and attach it to an email. You don't have to upload it into the EMR and then figure out the mail merge and then remove it. And so all of that is completely gone with a touch of a button. If you want to go a step further, rather than downloading the videos of the embryoscope onto a USB and taking it to the patient, you, at a click of a button, can give them live access to their embryos throughout culture. So the way that we structured the study was we asked these 6 lab directors before and after, okay, and we measured the following things: the total amount of time per cycle, the savings that came in terms of clinical hours, but also in terms of risk. We also looked at it in monetary terms. And the one that I like the most is this new KPI, which is the number of cycles that we have a capacity to treat as a single embryologist. So what did we find? So firstly, this was a very common pathway, okay, that there's a 4-step process before Chloe. Okay, so you look at your time-lapse system, you annotate it through the software, and then you write it down on a piece of paper, you go to computer, put in the EMR, and then you either call the patients, or some clinics will communicate by email, some use WhatsApp, but some form of communication to the patient to give them an update. So those 4 steps become a single step after the direct integrations. So what we have, if you look at it, these steps happen again and again and again throughout the 7 days. It's different from one clinic to the other. So some clinics will communicate with the patients every day. Other clinics have chosen to only communicate 2-3 times through the process. Others just right at the end. In fact, some clinics in the US didn't do PN checks. We didn't think that that was necessary. So for me, I found that quite surprising. But what you end up having is this whole flow of the various steps. In green, you have procedural steps. These are the things that we embryologists like to do, right? Doing an egg collection, verifying an embryo. And then you have the red steps. These are the administrative tasks: writing down, typing in, generating a report. So the before and after, the before you have a lot of red, a lot of administration, and after there's no admin. So it becomes a kind of a better day-to-day. Nobody became an embryologist to do administration, right? That's a byproduct of what we came here to do. So what was interesting to see, we looked at the distribution of what was procedure and admin in each of the days. And we also looked at it overall. So general point for you to take home is that about half of your time is being used up doing admin. Now, this is, in my personal view, not good use of your very valuable time. Remember, us embryologists, limited resource at a global level. So this is one example. We have these graphs for all the clinics that participated. The first bar is the number of hours per cycle before you introduce a technology, and in red at the end is after you introduce. And we broke it down in each of the days. The take-home in this particular clinic, they saved 18.4 hours per cycle. It was a particularly inefficient clinic that didn't have good use of their EMR. Okay, so they used a lot of admin time when they were communicating with patients. It was the embryologist would write a report by email, who sends over to an administrator, who then populates it into a nice report, and a third person then picks that up and sent it in an email. So this is why this particular clinic was quite inefficient in time. And the savings were mostly around when there's patient communication, or where there's embryo assessment. So the day 5 to day 7, when we do most of the embryo assessment, that's where most of the savings kind of come in. We didn't just look at it in terms of hours, we looked at it in terms of risks. So we did a full failure mode effects analysis. So we've presented lots of FMEAs and other technologies in the past. I think it's a great way to assess whenever you're introducing a new change and trying to preempt certain risks that might be coming into the process. And we could see that the risk reduction levels were very much in line with the same process steps that were generating more time to the embryologist as well. But certain risks, for instance, the fact that a human typo can lead to a viable embryo either being discarded or the most viable embryo not being selected for transfer, which has implications in terms of the chance of this particular patient becoming pregnant. So when we're looking at it across the different clinics as a comparison, it's worth highlighting that the American clinics tended to be less efficient than the European ones. Okay, and this is partly because in America there's a lot more PGTA, which is a lot more labor intensive in terms of the biopsy and in terms of the vitrification compared to the European counterparts. But it's also because the number of technologies being used are different. In this case, this example, this was a time-lapse user, but the other American clinic wasn't a time-lapse user, whilst here in the UK, most of our clinics are time-lapse users. The same goes with electronic witnessing that is widely used here, not so common in America. We see that this reduction, the amount of reduction did vary between the different interviewed. And what we found was that the more inefficient they were to begin with, the more savings they got as a percentage. Okay, so the American clinic got 58%, whilst the European clinics were around 30% savings in time. That KPI that I really like, which is cycles per embryologist, if you take the American clinic as an example, which is the third one, you can see that they had cycles per embryologist of 54 to begin with. That's changing to 130 when they reviewed their process and made their process leaner. And the difference was not small between the American and the European clinics. It's about twofold difference between the two. In terms of the average time required per cycle, before Chloe, it was about 16 hours. Afterwards, it was about 9. Okay, so if you're talking about 7 hours per cycle, if you're doing 1,000 cycles per year, we're talking about 7,000 hours per year. So it's important for us to look at these things because sometimes, a lot of the time when I'm doing these interviews, they're going, but this only takes a minute. It doesn't take a minute because when you start actually monitoring the person doing the procedure, you start identifying that just sending something to print, for instance, you go to the printer, there's no paper, and then there's no this, and there's, so you start identifying that it doesn't only take a minute when you actually do some observations. What we also seen is this comparison between the fastest and the slowest clinic. So before the technology was introduced, there was a 4-fold difference. After the technology was introduced, there was only a 2-fold difference. So what we're seeing here is a clear example where technology is bringing standardization to practice. And we're seeing less differences from one clinic to the other, allowing leaner processes throughout irrespective of the difference in geographies. We also looked at it in monetary terms. This is an example clinic, but we have this across for all the clinics. We were talking here in dollars. We had monetary savings, which were direct cost savings, and we had also in terms of risk savings, which were derived from the failure mode effects analysis. So these are not small numbers. And if you're talking about $1,000 difference from before or after introducing a technology, once you do 1,000 cycles, we're talking about 6-figure monetary terms here. So in conclusion, introducing a fully integrated and digitized technology into clinical practice can increase efficiencies. It can reduce risk, reduce costs, and improve the standards of care. So my take-home message to you is for those of you who have identified things here that yes, I can see that there's a bit more administration that I need to have in my clinic, implement a lean management vision or culture in your clinic. Try to look at things to eliminate waste and to maximize value to patients. If you take the time to do this, it will save you a whole load more time going forward. Invest in fully digitizing your workflow. And you know, we're already seeing on the news all the talk about how do we solve the problems on the NHS, how do we make the NHS more efficient. And I'm going to make the political comment here that particularly in the NHS, the computing system does need to be figured out. Basic computers that we're using just to input information needs to be looked at. So the digital workflow could be a solution that goes not just for us in fertility, but beyond in healthcare as well. And integrate between the different companies that we're using. We don't just have one digital company. Don't allow the companies to work in silos, because that doesn't work for us. It doesn't work for our patients. Ensure that you have fully integrated processes within your clinic. So thank you very much to all the clinics who took their time to be interviewed. We have kept them anonymized. We've actually done this 30 times, not 6, but these are the 6 that gave us permission to talk here today. And also a big thank you to all the posters that are being presented here with City Fertility, CRGH, King's Fertility, CRGW, and Harley Street Fertility Clinic. So some great work out there on how AI is being used in clinical practice. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cristina. We've got time for one very quick question, if anyone's got any.
Thank you, Chris. That was an amazing talk. I often struggle with, I love digitization, and I certainly am the first one who wants to kind of pass this over from a patient experience perspective, and that's great. But what's your view on being an embryologist who's migrated from looking at embryos, scoring the embryos based on trophectoderm, inner cell mass expansion, and then all of a sudden changing the grading scheme to an EQ score? And we're talking a very digitized language now as clinical embryologists who've migrated from the old times to the new.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in fact, just to take away the brands, you know, all the different AI providers provide you a score, right? And what one score means, how does it translate across the different scores? So now it's not just Gardner that we're discussing and the fact that we're different than Gardners, but now we have all these numbers from 1 to 10 coming from different providers. I think the important thing is that we understand what is the implication of that number. So whichever company you choose to use, you need to understand, what does an 8 mean? Is that different to a 4 or not? Should I transfer an 8 over a 6, or is that in the same bucket? So you need to understand what that means for each provider. The way that we solve this problem is that we do validation with the clinic, with their data. We have the validation globally and the validation with their clinic, so they can understand that as well. So you need to understand what the figure means in clinical terms, so that you can transfer that across to clinical decision. And secondly, you need to have an understanding of how we came up with that figure, because AI does mistakes. We do mistakes, okay? Mistakes are going to happen on the AI side as well. So you need to know when you ignore the AI and when you don't. And when it's just a figure and you're only getting a score, that's difficult to do. So what I like is to be able to tell, yes, I got a low score, and these are all the biological reasons why I got this score. Now you can have a conversation with the patient that goes beyond just it's good quality, it's poor quality, but we have identified certain anomalies that this is happening. This is highly unusual in other cases. Whether we transfer or not, let's have that discussion now. Okay? But certainly we're not transferring embryos that we didn't know this had happened. AI is there telling you, this is a duck. This is severely fragmented. This morphokinetics was outside the normal range. And as humans, we just can't process all of that on our own. I just have one last thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to move on. We're going over time a bit.
Just one last thing. People often ask me, is AI going to replace me? You know, or is AI going to replace embryologists? It's a flat out no. AI will never replace embryologists. But an embryologist with AI will certainly replace an embryologist without AI.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is that one working?